Imagine a world where something as simple as salt could make kings rich and empires tremble. We are not talking about any ordinary seasoning, but the mineral that could dictate power, trade, and even wars. Salt, the forgotten currency, the silent driver of history. Today, we are diving deep into the forgotten salt economies. And yes, you will never look at your pretzels the same way again. Thousands of years ago, before money printed with faces of presidents or queens existed, people needed something that could last, be portable, and everyone agreed had value. Enter salt, not the kind that comes from a shaker, but pure, precious, life-sustaining salt. In many ancient societies, it was literally worth its weight in gold. In the deserts of Africa, caravans carried salt slabs hundreds of miles, trading them for gold dust from the forests. Imagine thousands of people, camels groaning under the load, all marching across a barren landscape, because the right amount of salt could change the fortunes of a village overnight. It was like cryptocurrency before cryptocurrency, only slower and sandier. Meanwhile, in Europe, salt was equally revolutionary. In medieval Venice, controlling salt production meant controlling wealth itself. Salt taxes filled coffers that funded wars, cathedrals, and the occasional extravagant party that historians later called moderately excessive. The city that controlled the salt trade often controlled the destiny of nations. Even in Asia, empires understood the power of salt. In China, the government monopolized salt for thousands of years. Collecting salt taxes was so essential that rebellions often centered around it. Imagine an emperor sending armies not to seize land, but to secure salt mines. If that does not make you respect your table salt, I do not know what will. Salt was not only valuable for taste, it was essential for preservation. Without it, meat spoiled, fish rotted, and entire economies faltered. In the age before refrigerators, salt was the difference between life and death, and governments knew it. Controlling salt meant controlling the ability of your citizens to eat tomorrow. That is a lot of power for a tiny mineral. In Africa, the city of Timbuktu was not just famous for scholars and books, but also as a hub of the salt trade. Traders crossed the Sahara with slabs of salt, exchanging them for gold from southern regions. Picture this: golden coins jingling, salt slabs clinking, and camels marching under the blazing sun. And yes, if you think it sounds exhausting, it absolutely was. Salt roads crisscrossed continents, connecting places that otherwise would have never seen each other. These were the veins of early global trade. And along these veins, stories of fortunes, betrayals, and adventures unfolded. Some merchants became legendary simply because they managed to transport salt safely across hostile territories. In medieval Europe, salt taxes could literally bankrupt people. If a ruler needed cash, he could raise the salt tax, and suddenly the poor had to make impossible choices: eat or pay your salt dues. This is where the phrase "worth your salt" might actually come from. If you were not valuable enough, you could not afford to eat salt. Fast forward to colonial times, and salt still played a pivotal role. The British Empire, notorious for controlling trade and taxes, knew that taxing salt could spark rebellion, and it did. The most famous example, Gandhi and the Salt March, a walk of 240 miles to make a point about taxes and independence. Salt, once again, at the heart of history. Salt was so strategic that cities and kingdoms often built fortresses around salt mines. Protecting salt was not just about protecting food, it was protecting wealth, military power, and influence. Think of it like guarding a gold reserve today, only crunchier in medieval Venice. Salt was transported in massive wooden barrels called salini, sometimes under armed guard. Smuggling was common because where there is value, there is risk and opportunity. Pirates, bandits, and corrupt officials were just as likely to target salt as they were to target gold or jewels. Even in ancient Rome, salt mattered. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt or given allowances to purchase it. The word salary itself comes from salarium, literally salt money. So next time you are complaining about your paycheck, just remember, it could be worse. You could be paid in salt. Salt-shaped urban development too. Cities with access to salt often flourished into trade hubs. Others dried up because they could not preserve food efficiently. It was not just an economic asset, it was infrastructure, nutrition, and survival rolled into one tiny crystal. In Africa, the salt trade led to remarkable cultural exchanges. Traders brought stories, music, religious ideas, and art along with salt. In a way, Salt was a medium of civilization. Without it, many cultural exchanges might have remained isolated, hidden behind deserts and mountains. Salt was also a weapon. During wars, controlling or destroying an opponent's salt supply could cripple armies. Without preserved food, armies starved. Without salt, economies suffered. Whoever controlled salt controlled more than taste. They controlled life itself. Salt mines themselves became symbols of power. In Germany, the city of Halle thrived because of salt. In Poland, the Wilicka salt mine produced salt for centuries, becoming a source of wealth, legend, and even underground chapels carved from the mineral itself. Talk about literally being inspired by your paycheck. In Africa, the Tagaza salt mines in the Sahara were considered so valuable that kings maintained armies just to defend them. The mines were inhospitable, harsh, and deadly, yet people endured it because salt was worth the risk. Wealth always demands sacrifice, and a little sand in your shoes. Salt led to the creation of trade networks that were surprisingly sophisticated. Traders had contracts, credit, and security measures. Some scholars argue these networks laid the groundwork for modern commerce. Salt, it turns out, was not just seasoning, it was finance, logistics, and law in crystalline form. In France, salt taxes called gabelle became infamous. They were so hated that they fueled anger leading up to the French Revolution. Salt, once again, proves it can stir more than food. It can stir the pot of history. People literally marched and died because of it. In China, the salt monopoly funded dynasties. The state controlled production and distribution, collecting taxes that financed everything from infrastructure to military campaigns. Salt revenue sometimes accounted for half the state income. Imagine a modern government suddenly funding half its budget from potato chips. That is the scale of importance we are talking about. Salt was central to trade between Europe and Asia as well. In the Mediterranean, it facilitated commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Merchants carried not only salt, but stories, knowledge, and exotic goods, creating an interconnected world centuries before globalization became a buzzword. The value of salt also created social hierarchies. In some societies, only the elite could afford enough salt to properly season their food. The poor ate what they could, often unsalted, while the wealthy enjoyed not just taste, but status. Salt was flavor, and status all in one small crystal. Salt preservation allowed for long-distance voyages. Without it, ships could not carry meat, fish, or other perishable goods. Naval expeditions, trade missions, and colonization efforts were often limited by the availability of salt. It was essential for survival at sea, making it a strategic military resource. Even today, some remnants of salt's historic value remain in language and culture. Terms like worth your salt or salt of the earth have their roots in the mineral that sustains civilizations. We casually sprinkle it on fries, but once it decided the fates of kingdoms. The stories of salt also remind us that economics is not abstract. It is tangible. Salt is proof that something small, cheap, and ordinary can become extraordinary under the right circumstances. Wealth, power, and influence often depend on resources we take for granted. Salt economies influenced architecture too. Cities built along salt routes developed marketplaces, storage facilities, and roads specifically designed for its trade. Entire urban landscapes owe their shape to a mineral. We now just shake on popcorn. From Timbuktu to Venice, from Wilicka to the deserts of Mali, salt connected continents and civilizations. It was money, survival, and culture all in one. The power of salt shaped the world in ways that most of us ignore today, and yet salt quietly faded from its throne as a dominant currency. With modern refrigeration, industrialization, and paper money, salt became ordinary again. But the history remains, a testament to the fact that even the humblest mineral can command empires, provoke revolutions, and preserve the stories of humanity. So the next time you sprinkle salt on your meal, remember you are holding a fragment of history, a crystal that once moved armies, inspired rebellions, and turned ordinary traders into legends. Salt was, and in a way still is, priceless.